I was sitting beside my dad, cutting my Christmas ham, when my phone buzzed against my thigh. The timing could not have been stranger. The dining room was warm and crowded with the glow of soft lights, the kind Marilyn loved to arrange, as if she were curating a magazine spread. My dad was mid-sentence, lifting his glass to make another one of his tidy little speeches. Lily sat across from me, smiling politely, unaware of the tightness in my chest. Everything looked peaceful, almost picture-perfect. Then I felt the vibration again. I slid my hand under the table, tapped the screen awake, and read the message. Leave quietly. Do not tell them. For a second, the room spun. The words were so sharp and sudden that I thought maybe I had imagined them, but they were still there, pulsing on the screen. My breath snagged in my throat. I looked up, slowly, like someone lifting her head from deep water. Marilyn was already staring at me. Her smile was small and soft, the same smile she used when guests arrived, or when she wanted my dad to feel admired. But this time it was different. Her eyes were fixed on me with a strange kind of stillness, as if she was watching the exact moment I read that message, as if she had been waiting for it. My fork slipped out of my fingers and hit the plate. The sound cut through the room louder than it should have. My dad paused mid-story, looked at me for half a second, then returned to his glass, ready to finish his toast. That was typical of him. He only noticed things when they interrupted him for too long. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. I had not planned to come home for Christmas this year. I had been working double shifts at the counseling center in Minneapolis, trying to outrun the ache that always crept in around the holidays. My childhood memories still lived in this house, but the house had changed. My mom had filled it with warmth and noise. After she died, it became a different place entirely, polished and quiet. The kind of quiet that did not comfort you, but reminded you something was missing. Sometimes people tell me they listen to stories like mine while washing dishes or sitting on their porch or driving to work. If you are listening right now, I would actually love to know what you are doing in this moment. For me, on the night everything in my life cracked open, I was sitting at a holiday table pretending to enjoy Christmas ham, while staring down a message that told me to run. I pushed my chair back gently, trying not to draw attention. Lily looked up with concern, her eyebrows knitting in that familiar way she used to when we were younger. I forced a smile and told her I just needed a breath of fresh air. My voice sounded too thin to be comforting. My dad waved without looking at me. Marilyn kept her eyes on my face, watching every move I made. I stepped into the hallway, the sound of laughter and clinking silverware fading behind me. The house felt colder the farther I walked. Even the framed photos on the walls felt like they were watching me. I grabbed my coat, pulled it tightly around myself, and opened the front door. The cold hit me immediately, the kind of Minnesota cold that slices straight through fabric. Snow drifted across the yard in soft sheets. The porch light cast a golden circle that made the falling flakes look like sparks. I stepped down the stairs, my boots crunching into the snow, the message burning in my mind. Leave quietly. Do not tell them. At first I thought no one was outside. The yard was still, the air brittle and silent. Then something moved near the driveway. A man stood next to my dad's dark-colored car. The shadows covered most of his face, but I could see the outline of a heavy winter coat, gloved hands, the rise and fall of his breath. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't nervous. He was waiting. I froze, halfway down the walkway, unsure if I should turn back or stand my ground. Before I could decide, he stepped into the beam of the porch light. His face was drawn, tired, older than I expected. He raised a hand slowly, not threatening, just deliberate. He held an envelope. I wanted to ask who he was. My jaw tightened, but my voice would not come out. Something about him felt familiar, in a way I could not explain, like the worn expression of someone carrying a story too heavy for too long. He stopped a few feet away from me. Your mom did not die the way they told you. My heart slammed so hard I felt it in my fingertips. The world narrowed around me, the cold cutting through my lungs. He placed the envelope in my hand. His grip was firm, steady, almost gentle. Then he stepped back toward the dark edge of the driveway, disappearing between the heavy pine trees as if he had been swallowed by the night. I stood alone, staring at the envelope. Snowflakes landed on it, melting into little dots across the paper. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside were printed pages stamped with the Wisconsin State Patrol emblem. Accident report. Multiple revisions. Irregularities noted. Date of incident. My mom's name. The evening she died. The same evening, I had been told it was nothing more than a tragic loss on an icy road. My throat closed. The wind stung my eyes, but it was not the wind making them water. Behind me, the house glowed with warm Christmas light. The muffled sound of silverware and small talk drifting out every time the door swung from the heat inside. They were in there, laughing, eating, pretending everything was normal. I looked down at the papers again. Nothing was normal. Not anymore. I clutched the envelope to my chest, trying to breathe, trying to understand. I took one step toward the porch, then another, the snow crunching under my boots, the truth rattling like a heartbeat against the cold. It felt like the ground beneath me had shifted, the kind of shift you only recognize once it is already happening. By the time I reached the door, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever I had walked out into that night, whatever message I had received, whatever truth waited in those pages, it was only the beginning. By the time I stepped back into the house, the warmth felt unreal. Too soft, too calm, almost like stepping into someone else's life. The noise from the dining room floated through the hallway, muffled by the thick carpet. My fingers were stiff around the envelope, and I shoved it deeper into my coat pocket before Marilyn or my dad could see it. I tried to breathe normally, but my chest felt tight, as if the cold air outside had frozen somewhere inside me. When I walked back into the dining room, everyone was still in their same seats. My dad had barely noticed I was gone. His glass was raised as if I had stepped out and returned before he had time to finish a sentence. Lily smiled at me, relieved. Unaware of the storm happening inside my body, I eased into my chair, nodding as if nothing was wrong. I tried to pick up my fork and cut another slice of ham, but my hand shook just enough that I had to set it down again. Marilyn watched me. She did not blink. Her expression stayed pleasant, but there was something sharp behind it, something that made my skin crawl. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening for something only she could hear. "Are you all right, Evelyn?" she asked, softly. Almost too softly. "You look pale." I forced a small laugh, pretending it was the cold. I said I had stepped outside without gloves. She made a sympathetic sound, the kind people make when they want to appear caring. I kept my eyes down so she would not see the panic still settling in my chest. I stayed at the table only as long as I had to. Each minute felt heavier than the last. As soon as the plates were cleared and my dad suggested coffee in the living room, I excused myself again, claiming I needed to check on something for work. Nobody questioned it. My dad was already talking to a business associate on his phone. Marilyn was leaning close to him, nodding as if every word mattered. They barely noticed me slip away. I went upstairs to the small guest room that used to be mine before Marilyn, redecorated the whole floor. It smelled faintly of lavender and furniture polish. The bedspread was neatly folded, the lamps perfectly placed. Nothing like the messy, warm room I grew up in. It felt unfamiliar, like a hotel room pretending to be part of my childhood. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled out the envelope. My hands were numb, not from the cold, but from the fear of what I was about to read. I took a deep breath and spread the papers out in front of me. The first page was a police report from the Wisconsin State Patrol. The date was burned into my mind. December 22nd, 2016. The night my mom died. The night my entire world changed. The report described icy roads and limited visibility, but sections of the text were overwritten. Notes had been erased and replaced. Entire blocks were whited out and typed over. There were revision dates in the margins, each one in different handwriting. None of that was normal. I turned to the second page. The witness statement did not match what my dad had told us that night. The timestamp was wrong by nearly an hour. The location pin was moved slightly on the printed map. It was the kind of detail you overlook if you trust the people around you. But once you stop trusting, everything looks different. My heart thudded as I flipped to the last page. There was a signature at the bottom. Detective Alan Mercer. I recognized the name immediately. He had been the one who came to the house after the accident. I remembered him standing in our living room, with snow melting off his boots. I remembered the way he avoided eye contact when he handed my dad his card. At the bottom of the page, there was a note. Officer reassigned. Case closed. With irregularities. It felt like the words were pulsing against the paper. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I gathered the papers quickly and slid them under the pillow just as the doorknob rattled. My stomach dropped. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. The knob turned again, harder this time, as if the person outside wanted to test whether I had locked it. A low voice drifted through the crack under the door. The heating system clicked on at the same moment, masking the words, but I recognized the cadence. Marilyn. She stayed there for a few seconds. Maybe she was listening. Maybe she was waiting. Then the footsteps faded down the hall. I exhaled slowly and sat back against the wall, pressing my hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it echoed off the walls. Once I was sure she was gone, I reached under the pillow and pulled out the papers again. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to keep reading. Each word felt like a small nail being hammered into the version of my life I had always believed. My dad had never shown me these documents. He had never mentioned any irregularities. He had said that Mom hit a patch of ice and the car slid into a ditch. He said the police confirmed everything. He said it was over and done. But the report in my hands told another story altogether. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the night my dad told us the news. I remembered him sitting on the couch with his face in his hands. I remembered Lily crying so hard she could barely breathe. I remembered the sound of the winter wind hitting the windows. I remembered Marilyn was not in our lives yet. A strange thought crept into my mind, a thought I did not want to examine too closely. If my dad lied to us about the accident, what else had he lied about? What else had he hidden? I stood and paced the room, trying to gather my thoughts. My feet sank into the plush rug, the softness at odds with the sharp fear building in my chest. I looked out the window. Snow was still falling in heavy flakes that blurred the world outside. The driveway lights cast long shadows across the ground. Somewhere out there, the man who gave me the envelope had disappeared into the dark. I did not know if he would come back. I did not know if he expected me to do something with what he had given me. But I knew one thing very clearly. Someone wanted me to see these papers. Someone wanted me to know the truth. And someone did not want me to tell my dad. I sat on the bed again, holding the reports in my lap. The silence in the room felt heavy, like a weight settling over my shoulders. My pulse finally began to slow, but the uneasiness stayed. I picked up the first page one more time, letting my eyes run over the words. Irregularities, revisions, altered statements. Nothing about it felt accidental. The truth was right there, but it was tangled, hidden beneath layers of someone else's intentions. As I stared at the papers, I felt something shift inside me, something small but unmistakable. A quiet certainty. A spark. An understanding that once you see a lie clearly, you cannot unsee it. And in that stillness, with the snow falling outside and the muffled sounds of my family downstairs, I realized I was not going to sleep that night. I was not going to pretend nothing had happened. This was only the start, and whatever came next, I was already in the middle of it. Sleep was a lost cause. And by the time the pale morning light crept into the room, my body felt wired and heavy at the same time. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in yesterday's sweater, the papers spread across my lap. My thoughts ran circles, tight and tangled, until I felt almost dizzy. I kept hearing the rustle outside my door from the night before, kept imagining Marilyn standing there, listening. It settled into my bones, a quiet warning I could not shake. Downstairs, I heard the familiar clatter of breakfast. My dad's deep laugh echoed through the vents, and for a moment, I wondered how he could sound so normal. Lily was probably at the counter eating cereal, her legs crossed, her hair in a loose braid the way she always wore it on holiday mornings. And Marilyn would be moving through the kitchen like she owned the place, setting out plates, humming to herself, keeping everything neat and warm and deceptively peaceful. I knew I had to get out of the house. I needed someone who could look at the papers with a clear head, someone who would not get pulled under by the emotional weight of the past. I thought of Sarah. We had met in college, survived heartbreaks and midterms and first jobs together, and she had gone on to become a corporate attorney in downtown Milwaukee. If anyone could see through these reports, she could. I gathered the pages and slipped them into my bag, making sure the zipper closed without snagging. When I opened the bedroom door, the hallway was empty. I moved carefully, listening for footsteps, my heart beating a little too fast. I went downstairs as casually as I could, hoping my face did not betray anything. Lily looked up from the breakfast island. She smiled, bright and easy. I realized how young she still seemed, even at 22. She had lived under Marilyn's influence since she was barely a teenager, and part of me wondered what that had cost her. What pieces of our mom she no longer remembered clearly. I told her I needed to run out for a while. She asked if everything was okay. I said it was nothing serious, just some last-minute errands. She did not question it. She never questioned things the way I did. Marilyn turned from the stove, her hair perfectly arranged, not a single strand out of place. Her voice was warm as she asked if I wanted coffee before I left. I told her I had to go. She watched me a little too closely, her eyes following every move, and for a moment, I felt the same cold prickle at the back of my neck that I had felt the night before. I stepped outside. The air was crisp and sharp, the kind of morning air that made every breath sting lightly. Snow clung to the edges of the walkway, crunching under my boots as I walked to my car. When I slid behind the wheel, I let my breath out slowly and tried to steady myself. The house looked quiet through the windshield, almost serene. It was strange how a place could look so peaceful from the outside while holding so many jagged edges inside. I drove toward downtown Milwaukee, letting the heater thaw my fingers as I gripped the steering wheel. Christmas decorations still hung from streetlights. The city was waking up slowly, people scraping frost from their windshields, others walking dogs in heavy coats. It felt like a different world from the one I had just left. When I reached the coffee shop near Sarah's office, I found her already inside waiting for me, wrapped in a long coat, her hair pulled into a loose bun. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. She did not ask anything at first. She just pointed to the booth in the corner, the one we always chose when we needed privacy. The heat inside the shop felt comforting, almost too comforting, like it might make me fall apart if I let it. I sat down and opened my bag. My hands were clumsy as I pulled out the pages and placed them on the table. Sarah reached for the first report, her lawyer instincts taking over. She leaned in, scanning every line with the kind of intensity that always made me feel both seen and supported. I watched the way her eyebrows pulled together, the way her fingers traced down the margin as if following invisible threads. When she finally looked up, her voice was low. She said the documents were irregular. The revisions were sloppy. The notes looked rushed and inconsistent. She pointed to specific sections, explaining what should have been standard protocol and what was clearly not. She said, "These are not normal accident reports. This was handled in a way that suggests someone wanted it done quickly, too quickly." My throat tightened. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way it had not been before. I told her about the text I received at dinner. The figure waiting outside, the envelope handed to me in silence. I tried to explain how Marilyn had watched me the entire time with eyes that felt almost predatory. When I said that, something in Sarah's expression shifted. She asked again if I was certain it was Marilyn at my door last night. I said I did not see her, but I knew her voice. I knew the way she paused before moving away. Sarah took a slow breath and said, "Someone was feeding me information from inside or close to the investigation. Someone who knew the truth was buried." She said whoever gave me the envelope might be trying to make sure I uncovered something they could not expose themselves. Then she told me I had to be careful, and that Marilyn was the type of person who did not like surprises. I stared at the papers spread between us. For 8 years, I had believed my mom died because of icy roads and bad luck. 8 years of aching, missing her voice, her warmth, her laugh. And now, all of it was unraveling, and the threads led right back into my own family. My phone buzzed again. I hesitated before looking at it. There was a message from an unknown number, the same as before. The same sickening chill washed through me. I turned the screen toward Sarah. It said, "They are lying to you. Do not trust your dad." I swallowed hard. My dad had been the one who held us together after the accident, the one who spoke to the police, the one who handled the funeral, the one who told Lily it was going to be okay, even when it wasn't. Sarah touched my wrist and told me I needed to breathe. Her voice was steady and calm in a way that always brought me back to myself. She said we needed to look at this piece by piece and not jump to conclusions until we had more proof. But every instinct inside me whispered that something was already wrong. Deeply wrong. When we stepped outside into the cold afternoon air, she insisted on walking me to my car. She said she did not like the idea of me being watched. I wanted to tell her she was overreacting, but I could not get the sound of Marilyn's voice outside my bedroom door out of my head. I drove home slowly, my fingers tense around the steering wheel. The sky was turning a pale gray as the sun dipped low. By the time I reached the driveway, the house was lit from the inside. Warm and inviting. But now I knew better. Warmth could be a disguise. Inside, Lily greeted me with a soft smile, her eyes bright with the kind of trust that made my heart ache. I looked at her and wondered how much she understood, how much she still believed in the story she had been given. She asked if everything was okay. I told her I was just tired. Then Marilyn stepped into the doorway of the kitchen, her hands clasped neatly, her expression calm but alert. She asked if I wanted dinner. I said I was not hungry. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Study me the way someone studies a crack in a window, deciding if it will spread. I went to my room and shut the door, but not before I caught a glimpse of her watching me. Still. Quiet. Waiting. I leaned back against the door and let out a long breath, the kind that comes from deep inside the chest. Everything felt like it was shifting under my feet, and I knew I could not stay in this house without unraveling more than the truth. The night outside was growing darker, and the first signs of snow drifted across the porch lights. The wind tapped gently against the window. Somewhere downstairs, my dad laughed again. A soft, easy sound. The sound of a man who believed he had nothing left to hide. I wished I could believe that was true, but I no longer did. The sound of my dad's laughter drifted up from the living room, soft and warm, but it did nothing to steady me. I stood at my bedroom window for a long moment, watching the snow slide down the glass in slow, uneven lines. The house looked so peaceful from the outside, with its soft yellow lights glowing through the curtains and the steady rhythm of familiar voices below. But inside my chest, a different kind of weather was forming, colder and sharper than anything falling from the sky. I knew I could not keep carrying this alone. Lily deserved the truth, or at least enough of it to keep her safe. I kept seeing her face from earlier, the way she tried to smile at me even though she could tell something was wrong. That small, worried look in her eyes was enough to push me out of my room. I went downstairs, moving slowly, trying not to draw attention. The air felt thick with the smell of roasted garlic and butter, the kind of dinner Marilyn liked to prepare when she wanted everything to look perfect. Lily was curled on the couch with a blanket around her legs, a candle flickering on the table beside her. She looked up when she heard me. I asked if we could talk. She nodded right away and sent a quick glance toward the kitchen where Marilyn was humming. Lily lowered the volume on the television and patted the cushion next to her. I sat down, choosing my words carefully. I told her that something was bothering me about the past, about how Mom died, about the details not sitting right anymore. I did not mention the papers or the text messages. Not yet. I just said that some things were not adding up and that I felt uneasy. Lily's face softened. She rested her mug on her knee and looked at me with concern. She asked if I thought the accident was not really an accident. The question came out in a whisper, a tremble in her voice that told me this fear had lived inside her too, but never had a place to come out. I said that I did not know for sure, but I felt like something had been hidden from us. She pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the flame of the candle for a moment. Then she told me that sometimes she felt like Marilyn knew more than she ever said. She said that after Mom died, Marilyn started showing up more often, even before she and Dad officially started seeing each other. That she took over, little by little, always smiling, always helpful, always in the right place at the right time. My chest tightened. I asked why she never told me that. Lily shrugged in a small, helpless way and said she assumed I already knew. Then she looked down, picking at a loose thread in the blanket, and admitted that she had been scared I would leave again if she said, something that made the house feel even less safe. I felt the weight of her words settle into me. I told her I would never leave her again. Not like that. Not without trying to understand what was really happening. Before she could say anything else, A voice floated in from the kitchen, sweet and casual. Marilyn asked what we were whispering about. She walked into the living room with a soft smile, wiping her hands on a towel, her earrings catching the warm light as she stepped closer. I could feel Lily tense beside me. Marilyn studied our faces for a few seconds. Too long to feel natural. She leaned her head gently, like someone trying to read a label on a jar. Then she smiled again. A smile that did not touch her eyes, and said that she hoped we were not worrying about anything unnecessary on a holiday like this. She said that families should hold each other close, especially during hard times. I stood, more to break her gaze than anything else. I told her I was going to get some fresh air before bed. She nodded, still smiling, still watching. Outside, the cold hit me immediately. The porch light gave the snow a soft, powdery glow, and the yard was silent, except for the occasional rustle of branches. I wrapped my arms around myself and walked slowly along the front path. The street was empty. The houses across the road were dark, their windows reflecting only the faint shimmer of holiday lights. A car drove past, its tires crunching through the slush. I watched it disappear down the block, feeling the weight of the house behind me. When I finally turned back toward the porch, I noticed the living room curtains shift just slightly. A silhouette stood behind them for a second, motionless, then vanished before I could make out the shape. I went back inside and headed right upstairs. I needed to get the papers out of my bag before Marilyn decided to do another walk past my door. I spread them across my bed again, reading and rereading, trying to make sense of every scribble, every correction, every missing detail. Each line seemed to pull me deeper into something I was not prepared for. One page mentioned the weather conditions the night of the accident. According to the report, the road had been salted earlier that evening. I remembered the news from that winter. I remembered plows lining the highway hours before Mom drove out to pick up Lily from her friend's house. So why would the report claim icy conditions? Why was the location note corrected twice? Why did the officer's handwriting change mid-paragraph? I rubbed my hands over my face, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. I set the pages aside and leaned back on the pillows, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere downstairs, I could hear my dad on the phone, his voice low and firm, the way he talked when business mattered more than anything else. Then Marilyn's voice floated up, smooth and clear, like oil over water. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, trying to hold on to some sense of what was real. My mind kept circling the same questions. If the report was wrong, then what actually happened that night? Why would someone change the documents? Who would benefit from hiding the truth? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I flinched, my pulse jumping. When I picked it up, there was no new message. It was just an alert from a news app, but my hands were still shaking. I turned off the lamp, letting the darkness settle around me. I lay still, listening to the faint hum of the house, the soft creaks in the hallway, the whisper of heating vents. Every sound felt amplified, as if the house itself was breathing. Sleep stayed far away. I drifted in and out of thoughts, in and out of memories, until the edges of my mind felt frayed. I did not know where this path would lead me, but I could feel it pulling me forward, step by step, even when I wanted to freeze in place. Somewhere in the early hours of the morning, I finally closed my eyes for real. My thoughts blurred. The room softened. My heartbeat slowed. And that was when another sound rose from the hallway, a soft click. Then, a slow creak of a floorboard just outside my door. I held my breath, waiting, listening. The sound did not come again, but it was enough to remind me that nothing in this house was as quiet as it seemed. The creak outside my door faded into silence, but it stayed in my body like a bruise. I lay completely still, barely breathing, listening for any shift in the hallway. Nothing moved. No footsteps, no shadows slipping under the door, no soft whisper of someone turning away, just quiet, thick and heavy, the kind that makes your skin prickle, because silence can feel louder than sound. I stayed awake until the faint gray of morning began to touch the corners of the room. My eyes felt grainy, my pulse unsteady. Eventually, I pushed myself upright, every muscle tight from hours of tension. I showered quickly, letting the hot water beat against the back of my neck, trying to wash the fear out of my body. It didn't work. The minute I stepped back into the bedroom, the cold air hit me, and everything rushed back. Downstairs, the house was already in motion. I heard dishes clinking, water running, the soft smack of a cabinet closing. I went down slowly, gripping the railing harder than I needed to. Lily sat at the kitchen island with a bowl of oatmeal, her hair still damp from her shower. She gave me a sleepy smile that made my chest hurt. She had no idea what happened outside my door last night. Or maybe she did, and she was pretending she didn't. Marilyn stood by the stove, humming softly as she stirred a pot of soup. She turned just as I entered, her smile soft and practiced. The same smile she used at church potlucks and holiday dinners when she wanted people to think she was gentle and gracious. She asked if I slept well. I told her I slept fine, hoping my face didn't betray the lie. She studied me for a second longer than necessary. Her eyes flicked to my hands, then back to my face. Then she smiled again and returned to her pot. The air smelled of cinnamon and onions, warm and familiar, almost comforting in a way that felt wrong. Lily finished her breakfast and grabbed her coat. She said she was heading to the library to work on her winter term paper. I walked her to the door and hugged her tightly before she stepped outside. She seemed surprised by the intensity of it, but hugged me back, pressing her cheek against my shoulder. I whispered that I loved her. She whispered it back, her voice barely above breath. Then she left, crunching through the snow toward her car. When I turned around, Marilyn was standing in the hallway, one hand resting on the staircase banister, her head slightly tilted. She asked if something was bothering me. Her voice was soft, but edged with something sharp that made my stomach clench. I said I was just tired. She nodded like she didn't believe me. Then she asked if I planned to stay home that day. She said she and my dad had errands to run and wanted to know if she should. Expect me for dinner. I told her I probably would not be home until late. She held my gaze for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to push further. Finally, she said that family was strongest when everyone stayed connected, and she hoped I remembered that. I grabbed my keys and coat and left the house without looking back. The cold air outside felt like a relief, sharp and honest, not pretending to be anything else. I drove toward Lake Michigan, letting the road blur under my tires. The sky was pale blue with streaks of gray, and the shoreline looked almost silver in the morning light. I parked near the old riverwalk and stepped out, pulling my scarf tighter around my neck. The wind coming off the lake was strong, pushing against me as I walked. I needed to clear my head, needed to get some distance from that house and everything inside it. I walked slowly, listening to the crunch of snow under my boots, watching my breath rise into the cold air. People passed me with dogs and coffee cups, bundled tight in coats and scarves. Life for them seemed normal, calm, simple. But inside me, everything felt like a storm gathering strength. I sat on a bench near a frozen patch of the river, the paper bag with the reports resting beside me. I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a long moment. Then I scrolled to my contacts and tapped the name I had been avoiding for years. Ethan. We had grown up on the same street when we were kids. He had been at our house constantly, eating dinner with us, doing homework with me at the dining table, while Mom baked cookies. After the accident, he drifted away, swallowed by college and a fast-moving career. I had not spoken to him in nearly 2 years. But he was smart, and he had always been curious. He worked in tech now, in data analysis, in the world of numbers and secrets. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I tapped it. The phone rang twice before he answered, his voice familiar but deeper than I remembered. He asked if everything was all right. I told him no. I told him I needed help. I told him I had found something strange about Mom's accident. He stopped me immediately and told me to meet him that afternoon at a small cafe near the Milwaukee Art Museum. His voice was steady, urgent, the voice of someone who sensed something serious. I hung up and sat back, my breath coming in small, uneven bursts. A gust of wind swept across the river and stung my cheeks. As I stared out at the ice, a memory surfaced. My mom laughing in the kitchen while Lily danced around the table, her hair in tiny braids, her cheeks rosy from the winter cold. My dad coming in with snow on his coat, kissing her cheek as she stirred a pot on the stove. I remembered that moment so clearly. The warmth of it, the safety. I wondered how much of it had been real, how much had been an illusion built on lies. I stayed by the river until the cold sank deep into my bones. Then I drove back toward the city. I reached the cafe early and chose a seat near the back, where I could see the door. My hands would not stop shaking. I kept pressing my palms together, trying to ground myself, but every time I looked at the envelope in my bag, the fear crept back. Ethan walked in about 20 minutes later. He spotted me immediately and came over, sliding into the seat across from me. He looked older than I remembered, a little tired, but his eyes were focused and sharp. He asked what happened. I pulled out the papers and laid them on the table. As he read, I watched his expression shift. His eyebrows tightened. His jaw clenched. He flipped through each page carefully, studying every detail. When he finally looked up, his voice was low. He said these reports were altered. He said someone had tampered with the file in a way that suggested internal involvement. Then he asked me if my dad had ever mentioned a detective named Alan Mercer. I told him no. I told him that name never came up once in 8 years. Ethan leaned closer and lowered his voice. He said that sometimes, in cases like this, families with influence can push investigations in certain directions. Then he stopped, looked at me, and asked if I was sure I was ready to know what might come next. I said I didn't have a choice. I said I had to know. He nodded slowly, folding the papers back into the envelope. He said he would run some data checks, dig into the digital records, see if he could find traces of the original files before they were changed. He asked me to stay cautious around Marilyn. He said something about her gave him a bad feeling when we were kids, long before any of this happened. I felt a strange shiver run down my spine. We sat there for another half hour, going over possibilities, trying to piece together a puzzle with too many missing sections. When we finally stood to leave, he promised to call me as soon as he found anything. I thanked him, my voice barely above a whisper. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange mix of hope and dread. I finally had someone on my side, someone who believed me. But that also meant the truth was close enough to reach for, close enough to hurt. I drove home slowly, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked quiet, almost too quiet. The curtains in the living room were drawn, blocking the warm yellow glow inside. I stepped out of the car, feeling the cold settle over me again. Then I saw it. A black sedan parked halfway down the street, its engine running softly, exhaust curling into the cold air. I stood still, staring. The driver did not move. The windows were tinted. The car did not pull away. I felt it then, a subtle, unmistakable shift in the air around me. I was being watched. I did not move at first. I just stood there on the frozen sidewalk, with my breath drifting into the air, and that black sedan sitting in the quiet like a shadow that had its own heartbeat. The street lamps glowed softly on the snow, but the tinted windows swallowed the light. I could not see a face or a silhouette, only the still shape of someone sitting too perfectly still. The cold crawled up through my gloves. My fingers tingled. Something inside me tightened, the way it used to when I was a kid waking from a nightmare and staring at the dark corner of my room, afraid something was hiding there. Only this time the fear felt real, present, focused. I forced myself to walk toward the house, not rushing, not dragging my feet, just moving like nothing was wrong. Each step crunched in the snow. I listened for the engine revving or the sound of a door opening behind me. Nothing. When I reached the porch, I turned slightly, as if checking my footing on the step. The car stayed where it was. No movement, no sound, just the steady curl of exhaust. Inside the house, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to calm the pounding in my chest. The foyer felt too quiet, too still. I peeked through the side window. The car was still there. Then its headlights flicked on with a sudden white glare. The sedan rolled forward slowly, disappearing around the curve. My body sagged against the wall. I went upstairs to my room and sat in the dark, my hands trembling. Whoever sat in that car had wanted me to see them, wanted me to feel watched. And I did. Sleep felt impossible. My mind kept replaying the image of that car. When morning came, pale light seeping through my curtains, My phone buzzed. Ethan. He said he needed me to meet him and Sarah right away. He said they had something I needed to see. So I grabbed my coat and drove into Milwaukee, checking the mirror too often, scanning every car behind me. The black sedan never appeared, but the feeling stayed with me like static electricity under my skin. The office Ethan used was a small rented suite on the second floor of an older brick building by the river. When I stepped inside, Sarah was sitting at the table covered with printouts, and a man I did not know stood near the window with a notebook in his hand. Ethan introduced him as Caleb, someone who helped him track down public records. Ethan had a laptop open. He motioned for me to sit. The air smelled like old carpet and paper. I took a slow breath, bracing myself without even knowing what for. He clicked a file. A traffic camera video loaded. Shaky, grainy, full of falling snow. A timestamp from 8 years ago. A lonely stretch of highway. A compact sedan moved across the frame, the same type my mom drove. A few seconds later, another set of headlights glowed behind it. Bigger. Higher. Moving in the same direction. A dark SUV. I leaned closer without meaning to. My pulse picked up. Ethan paused the video and zoomed in. The outline of the second vehicle was blurred, but the shape was familiar. I had ridden in that model for years. The same kind my dad had driven back then. The one he claimed had been parked in our driveway all night. My stomach twisted. Caleb explained quietly that this video had been buried in an outdated archive. He said someone tried to delete it the following year, but the delete request failed. The user ID on the failed attempt matched the department where Mercer worked. Sarah slid more papers toward me. Bank transactions. Transfers made within days of the accident. Money moving through a small company my dad used for side projects, then landing in Detective Miller's personal account. Sarah kept her voice low, comforting but steady. She said this was no longer about suspicion. This was building into a full pattern, a predictable timeline, enough for a state-level investigation. I felt the world tilt slightly. My dad's voice echoed in my memory, saying he had been home, saying he never left the house, saying he loved my mom. Every sentence suddenly felt like a carefully placed brick in a wall built to keep the truth out. There was more. Another email chain between my dad and Marilyn. They did not mention specifics, but talked about avoiding complications and making sure the insurance process moved smoothly. A message from Marilyn hinting that as long as a particular officer felt taken care of, the file would not be reopened. My breath caught. My mom's name was not even in the email, just words like risk and exposure, like my mother's life had been a business problem. I asked Sarah what we do now. Her answer was simple. We take it to someone who cannot be influenced by local loyalties. We left together to meet a state prosecutor Sarah trusted. The afternoon sky was a flat gray that reflected on the river like dull metal. Inside the office, the prosecutor listened carefully as Sarah laid everything out. The video, the transfers, the emails, Thomas's written account. The prosecutor's face grew more serious with each piece. When she turned to me, I told her everything. The Christmas text, the envelope, the black sedan, the feeling of someone hovering at the edge of the truth, waiting to see if I would get too close. The prosecutor asked if I was willing to testify if needed. My voice barely wavered when I said yes. By the time I left the office, my legs felt like they were carrying someone else. Someone braver than I felt. When I got home, the daylight outside was fading to blue. I found Lily curled up on the couch, with a blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were red, her face puffy. She asked where I had been. Her voice cracked when she said Marilyn told her I was trying to tear apart the only family we had left. I sat down beside her. She leaned against me carefully, like she was afraid to choose a side. I told her I was not trying to hurt Dad or destroy anything. I told her families break because of lies, not because someone insists on the truth. I told her Mom deserved better than a false story about icy roads. Lily whispered that she did not know who to believe. I told her she did not need to choose right now. All she needed was to listen to the part of herself that felt hollow every day. Time she thought about Mom's death. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. That night, she asked if she could sleep in my room. We lay there in the dark, both awake, both listening. When the knock came, it shook the whole house. A loud, heavy pounding at the front door. Lily jolted upright. My heart raced so fast it hurt. Down the hall, I heard my dad get up, his footsteps moving quickly. Marilyn's voice followed, sharp and flustered. Another knock, firmer, official. Lily grabbed my hand and we walked out to the hallway. We stopped at the top of the stairs. From there, we could see everything. My dad opened the door. 2 state law enforcement officers stood in the cold, their badges catching the foyer light. They addressed him clearly and calmly. They were there with a warrant for his arrest on suspicion of tampering with evidence and committing fraud connected to the death of Margaret Carter. My mom's name filled the air like a bell tolling. Marilyn gasped, stepping forward in panic, insisting this was a mistake. My dad tried to negotiate, even then, asking if they could talk inside, asking if they could wait for his lawyer. The officers did not shift an inch. One read from the warrant. The other asked him to turn around. Lily trembled beside me. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. My dad looked up at us. His eyes met mine, and something passed between us. Something I could not name. A flicker of fear. A flicker of anger. A flicker of knowing that the wall he built had finally started to crack. He did not look away as the handcuffs clicked. The officers led him outside. The door closed. Silence filled the house again. Lily cried into my shoulder, her body shaking. I held her tighter. The truth was no longer creeping around the edges. It had stepped fully inside our home. Nothing would ever go back to the way it was, and I felt that truth in the way the house breathed that night. After the patrol car pulled away and the red taillights disappeared into the dark, the silence that settled over our hallway did not feel like any silence I had known before. It felt like the moment after a storm when you stand outside and realize the landscape has changed. Lily cried herself to sleep in my bed. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint winter wind push against the windows. Somewhere in the city, my dad sat in a holding cell, and for the first time since I was a little girl, I had no idea what he might be thinking. I did not know if he was planning a way out or finally sitting with what he had done. When morning came, the light felt wrong, too bright for a house that had just been cracked open. I woke to the sound of Marilyn's voice downstairs, clipped and tight, talking on the phone. Lily was already up, standing by the window in my room, staring out at the front yard, where the tire tracks from the cruisers had carved ugly lines through the fresh snow. She asked in a small voice what would happen now. I told her honestly that I did not know everything, but there would be lawyers and hearings and a lot of questions. I said that the truth had started to come out, and that part would not stop. She whispered that she hated this, hated all of it, and I said that I did too. Hating it did not make it less necessary. Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with the smell of coffee, but none of its comfort. Marilyn stood at the counter, perfectly dressed, as if she had never gone to bed. Her phone lay face down beside her mug, and a yellow legal pad sat in front of her with notes already scribbled across it in neat lines. Her energy was sharp, frantic under the surface, like someone spinning a dozen plates in the air at once. She looked up when we walked in. Her eyes were a little puffy, but there were no tears now. Her grief had hardened into something else. Something like strategy. She said we needed to stay calm and think. She said mistakes happened in the justice system all the time. She said that once a good lawyer explained how much pressure my dad had been under, everything would settle down. The words poured out of her smoothly, too smoothly, like a speech she had practiced in the mirror. Then she looked at Lily and said that whatever Evelyn thought she had seen or found, it was just making things harder. That if this went badly, our family would lose everything. Our house, our savings, Lily's health insurance, her tuition, her future. I felt Lily flinch beside me. Marilyn saw it and softened her tone, telling her she understood that I meant well, but I was letting grief make me irrational. I stepped closer to the island and told Marilyn that grief was seeing your mom turned into a lie for almost a decade, not asking questions about why. I told her I would rather live in a small apartment with the truth than in a big house built on what she and my dad had done. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Annoyance. Maybe fear. Then she smiled again, that careful, controlled smile, and said we would talk about all of this later when emotions were not so high. The doorbell rang. Lily jumped. I felt my heart kick against my ribs. Marilyn walked to the door, smoothed her sweater, and opened it with the kind of gracious posture she used for holiday guests. Sarah stood on the porch with a woman I did not know. The stranger carried a slim black folder and wore a badge at her belt. She introduced herself as an investigator from the state attorney's office. Her voice was polite but firm. She asked if they could come in. We moved into the living room. The investigator explained that with my dad in custody, they were conducting a search of his office and personal files as part of this ongoing investigation. She handed Marilyn a copy of the warrant. Marilyn's hand tightened on the paper as her eyes scanned it, but she nodded and said she understood. Lily stood half behind me, fingers curled in the back of my sweater. Sarah gave me a small, steady look that said she was here, that this was necessary. The investigator and another officer went to my dad's office. Marilyn tried to follow them inside, but they gently asked her to remain in the hallway. That alone seemed to shake her. She was used to being in every room where decisions were made. From the doorway, I watched as they opened drawers, checked file cabinets, and powered on his desktop computer. Everything that had always looked so controlled now felt like a stage set being pulled apart. They found a locked drawer on the left side of the desk. The officer asked for the key. Marilyn hesitated, then reached into a decorative bowl on the bookshelf and handed it over. Inside the drawer were several envelopes and a small metal cash box. One envelope held printed emails, not just the short versions I had seen before, but full threads with more context. The investigator read through them, her expression tightening. She passed them to Sarah, who scanned them quickly and then met my eyes. She did not have to say anything. I saw it in her face. The language was more direct. There were phrases about managing fallout if the insurance company raised questions. A line in Marilyn's neatly worded email saying that paying Mercer was a necessary expense to ensure the accident report did not create further complications. I felt nauseous. In the cash box, under a stack of older receipts, the investigator found a folded document that made my chest go cold the moment I saw the heading. It was a will, a revised one, dated just days before the accident. My mom's name at the top, my mom's signature at the bottom. Only the loops and lines of her name did not look quite right. Too shaky, too uneven in places where she used to write with a steady hand. I had watched her sign field trip forms and report cards for years. This looked like someone trying to copy her from memory. The distribution in that document shifted nearly everything into my dad's control. Real estate, accounts, the business shares my mom had held privately from before the marriage. There was a section about the girls being taken care of through him, not directly. Sarah looked at it, then glanced at me with an expression that said a lot without any words. Forgery, coercion, or a signature taken at a moment when my mom was not in full control of herself. None of those options felt like love. The investigator asked Marilyn when exactly my mom had signed that document. Marilyn's voice wavered for the first time as she said my mom had been tired and wanted to simplify things. She painted a picture of a woman who had decided to let go and make it all easier for her husband. I thought of my mom teaching me to balance a checkbook, insisting that I always know where my own money was. I thought of her pride in buying her first small condo years before she met my dad. Simplify was not her word. Protect was. The investigator did not argue. She just made notes and asked how long Marilyn had known my dad before the wedding. Marilyn answered with a carefully rehearsed timeline. After the accident. After the grief. After the dust settled. That was when Sarah's phone buzzed softly. She glanced at the screen and her eyebrows lifted just a fraction. She stepped to the side, opened the message, then looked at the investigator. It was from Thomas. He had forwarded a still image and a short video clip pulled from an old security camera at a diner on the south side. The date stamp put it weeks before the accident. My dad sat in a booth, leaning across the table, talking with a woman whose hair and profile were unmistakable. Marilyn. The investigator watched the clip twice. No sound, but body language said enough. Familiarity. Intensity. Not two strangers meeting for the first time. She turned back to Marilyn and asked if she wanted to adjust her earlier answer about when they began seeing each other. Marilyn's face lost some of its color. She stammered something about casual encounters, community events, bumping into each other here and there. Nothing serious, she insisted, until after my mom passed. The words sounded thin even to my ears. At that moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped back into the hallway and checked it. Another message from the unknown number. "Do not forget," the text said, "that your dad was not the only one who went back to the scene." A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the Michigan winter. Before I could show Sarah, another officer entered from the front door and spoke quietly to them. "Investigator," handing her a short report. She read it, her jaw tightening, then looked straight at Marilyn. She told us that during the first round of questioning at the holding facility, my dad had stated that the person who handled the direct conversations with Mercer was not him, that he had asked someone he trusted to take care of those details after the accident, someone who had become close to the family. He had given them a name, Marilyn's. The living room felt suddenly smaller. Lily stood at the edge of the doorway, watching, her eyes wide. She looked from the investigator to Marilyn, then to me. For the first time since she walked into our lives, Marilyn did not have an answer ready. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and her eyes darted toward Lily like she could still pull one more performance. Together, if she just tried hard enough. But something had already broken in the way my sister was looking at her, and I knew we had reached the edge of whatever story Marilyn was able to control. For the first time since she walked into our lives, Marilyn had no ready answer, and that silence hung in the room like a heavy curtain. Lily stared at her with wide eyes that did not look like a child looking at a They looked like a girl realizing the person she trusted might be the very one who hurt her most. The investigator thanked Marilyn for her cooperation in that polite, firm way. That meant they did not believe a word she said and told us they would be in touch with dates for the preliminary hearing. After they left, the house felt hollow. Marilyn shut herself in the master bedroom with her phone, making call after call. I could hear the muffled rhythm of her voice through the wall, sharp and frantic. Lily and I sat at the kitchen table with untouched coffee between us, my hands wrapped around the mug just for the warmth. Her hands were balled up in the sleeves of her sweatshirt. She asked me in a shaky voice if this meant her dad was definitely guilty. I did not tell her what to think. I just told her that courts would decide the legal part, but what I knew was that things had been hidden. Money had changed hands. And Mom had never gotten a fair telling of what really happened to her. I said that whatever label the law put on it, what was clear was that they had chosen themselves over the truth. A few days later, winter tightened its grip on Milwaukee. The wind off the lake felt sharper. The sky stayed a pale, hard gray most days. One afternoon, Sarah called and said there would be a preliminary hearing at the county courthouse. She told me it would not be the full trial, but the prosecutor would lay out enough evidence for the judge to decide whether to move forward formally with charges against my dad, and possibly against Marilyn. I felt my stomach twist at the thought of sitting in that room, but I knew I had to go. Lily said she wanted to come too. I hesitated, thinking of her tear-stained face, but she was not a child any longer. She had already been dragged into this. Shielding her now would be another form of lying. So, I agreed. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps were lined with cars and a few local news vans. It was not a huge spectacle, but large enough that when we stepped out of Sarah's car, a couple of reporters lifted cameras and microphones. They called out questions about my dad, about the accusations, about whether I believed my own father could do something like this. Their words bounced off the stone and echoed up into the cold air. Sarah stepped slightly in front of us, her coat flaring in the wind, and said we had no comment at that time. Ethan walked on my other side, tall and steady, his presence like a weight I could lean against without losing my balance. Lily held onto my arm, her head down. Inside, the courthouse was bright and chilly, with high ceilings and the sound of footsteps and murmurs bouncing around. The courtroom itself felt both too small and too big. Wooden benches, a worn rug, the state seal on the wall behind the bench. My dad sat at the defense table in a dark suit, a tie knotted perfectly, his lawyer beside him. He looked thinner than I remembered, but still tried to project that same controlled authority he used in boardrooms. Marilyn sat a little behind him, next to her own attorney. Her hair was smoothed into place, makeup careful, outfit understated in a way that made my throat tighten, because I knew it was all curated to communicate innocence and restraint. She glanced back as we entered, eyes sweeping over me and then lingering on Lily. For a second, she looked almost pleading. Then her face shuddered. We took our seats behind Sarah and the prosecutor. Thomas sat further down the row, his weathered hands folded together. He gave me a small nod. Caleb sat next to him, a folder on his lap. Ethan slipped into the row behind us. When the judge entered, everyone stood. It felt surreal to me, this ceremony, this ritual, attached to the story of my family. When we sat again, the prosecutor stood and began to outline the case. Her voice was calm and measured. No drama, just facts. She spoke of the accident 8 years ago, the original police report, the altered files, the sudden infusion of money into a detective's account from an entity tied to Carter Logistics. She spoke of the traffic camera footage showing a second vehicle behind me, Mom's car, on the night of the crash. She did not say my name yet, but I felt every eye on my back. The defense lawyer responded with his own smooth summary. He said my dad was a respected business owner and devoted father, that grief and time could twist memories, that administrative mistakes in old files were not evidence of crime. He said we were all reading meaning into coincidences because of unresolved pain. It took everything in me not to stand up and argue with him right there. Then the prosecutor called me as a witness. My knees felt unsteady as I stood and walked to the witness stand. I raised my hand and promised to tell the truth. The wood of the railing felt cold under my palm as I sat down. She asked me questions about my relationship with my parents, about the night of the accident, about what my dad told me afterward. I spoke slowly, trying to keep my voice from shaking, describing how he had told us he was home the whole evening, how he had described the road as slick with ice, how he had always said it was a tragic accident we needed to put behind us. Then she asked about that Christmas dinner, the text under the table, the envelope in the driveway, my meetings with Sarah and Ethan and Thomas. I told the judge and the room about the papers, about the blacked out lines, about the word manipulated scrawled on the top page. I described the feeling of sitting in the same room with my dad while those documents burned in my pocket. The defense attorney tried to poke holes. He asked if I was certain what I saw on the traffic video was my dad's vehicle. I said I knew the shape well, but the prosecutor was not trying to call it proof of identity alone. It was part of a larger story. He asked if the anonymous texts could have been from someone trying to stir up trouble. I admitted they could. I was not here to say I knew every motive in this mess. I was here to say the official story never fit, and now the pieces of evidence we had gathered made that unease visible. After me, they called Thomas. He told the court about the early version of the report he had seen, about his attempt to pursue the story, about my dad telling him to stop coming by. He revealed the diner footage he had given the prosecutor, the image of my dad and Marilyn together, weeks before the accident, undercutting their story of a romance that bloomed in shared grief. Then the prosecutor called Lily. For a second, I wanted to object like a mother, to stand and say she was too fragile for this. But she was already walking toward the stand, small and straight-backed, her hair pulled into a ponytail that reminded me so much of her at 10 years old, it made my chest ache. She sat down, took the oath with a hand that trembled, and looked even smaller in the big wooden chair. The prosecutor was gentle with her. She asked if Lily remembered how things changed after Mom died. Lily nodded and said the house felt different, like someone had turned down the sound on all the soft things. She talked about how quickly Marilyn stepped in, how she began to manage everything, from meals to money to who was allowed to talk about Mom. Then came the hard part. The prosecutor asked if Lily ever overheard conversations she was not supposed to hear. Lily took a long breath. She said one night, not long after the accident, she had woken up to get water and heard Dad and Marilyn arguing in the kitchen. She had heard Marilyn say that if Mom had just signed the papers willingly, none of this would have been necessary. She said Marilyn had also warned Dad that if anyone dug too deep, that detective could not protect them forever. The courtroom went very still. The defense lawyer objected, said it was hearsay, said a grieving teenager could misremember. The judge allowed the testimony, for now, so it went to the state of mind of the people involved. I watched my dad during all of this. He sat with his jaw clenched, eyes lowered most of the time. But when Lily mentioned that line about Mom signing willingly, his shoulders stiffened. Marilyn, on the other hand, looked like someone had thrown ice water in her face. Her eyes widened, then narrowed sharply. When it was time for cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to make Lily doubt herself. He suggested she could have misunderstood adult conversations. He pointed out she had been under emotional strain. Lily's voice shook, but she did not back down. She said clearly that she remembered what she heard because it was the first time she realized Mom might not have simply lost control of the car. The lawyer turned away eventually, unsatisfied. Then it was Marilyn's turn to testify. She walked to the stand with that same careful poise she had used for every school event, every neighborhood gathering. She spoke sweetly at first, painting herself as the woman who stepped into a broken home to help. She called us her girls and said she had always tried to be a stabilizing presence. She said she had never intended harm to anyone. But when the prosecutor questioned her about the emails, the payments, the lonely diner meeting, the will signed days before the accident, the cracks started to show. Her answers grew less smooth. She blamed the lawyers. She said she had been following my dad's lead. She insisted the money to the detective was for legitimate consulting, not bribery. Finally, the prosecutor read aloud the line about paying the officer being a necessary expense to keep the report from creating complications. The words echoed in the room. Marilyn lost her calm. She stood up in the witness box, voice rising, saying we were twisting everything, that this was a witch hunt, that 2 ungrateful daughters and a washed-up reporter were trying to destroy the memory of a good man. Her attorney tugged at her sleeve, hissing for her to sit back down. But she kept talking, eyes wild, pointing toward me and then to Lily. The judge banged his gavel and warned her sharply. The prosecutor asked that her outburst be noted in the record. The control that had always been her greatest weapon slipped, and everyone saw it. By the end of the day, the judge took a short recess, then returned with a calm, stern expression. He said that, based on the evidence presented, the court found sufficient grounds to move forward with formal charges. He ordered that my dad remain in custody pending trial, due to risk of tampering with evidence and witnesses. He also granted the prosecutor's request to formally add charges against Marilyn for obstruction and conspiracy. When the bailiff moved to escort her, Marilyn looked stunned, then furious. She twisted to look for Lily, perhaps expecting the same pleading eyes she had always found before. Instead, she met my sister's gaze. For the first time, there was no trust in it, only hurt and clarity. As they led my dad and Marilyn out 2 separate doors, I felt something strange happen inside me. Not joy, not relief exactly, just a loosening, like a band around my lungs had finally been cut. Outside, snow was falling in soft, steady flakes. Lily and I walked down the courthouse steps side by side, the air cold and sharp around us. Reporters called out questions. Cameras clicked. Cars passed in the background. I slipped my arm through hers, held on tight, and we kept walking. Stepped together into a world where our family's secrets were no longer just whispers inside our own walls, but truths spoken aloud under winter skies. It was not over yet, but for the first time, justice was not just an idea in my head. It was something moving, alive, and real, with our names and Mom's name written in its path. The snow kept falling as Lily and I walked toward the parking garage, our boots crunching softly under the weight of it. The courthouse behind us glowed with its yellow lights. A building that had swallowed hours of our lives and spit us back out changed. The cold air settled on my face, sharp enough to feel like truth itself cutting through the haze I had lived under for so long. Inside the car, we sat for a moment without speaking. Lily leaned her forehead against the window and watched the flakes blur past the glass. She whispered that she felt both lighter and sick at the same time. I told her I understood, because I did. Justice did not come clean. It came jagged, leaving marks. The drive home felt like floating. The road was dark, only the street lamps stretching out ahead of us like quiet sentries. When we turned down our block, I realized we had no idea what we were going back to. The house was still ours, technically, but it no longer felt like home, not after everything that had been pulled out into the open. When I unlocked the front door, the warmth of the house hit me, familiar and foreign all at once. The lights were left on in the living room, casting a glow across the carpet. For a long moment, neither of us stepped inside. We stood on the threshold, like we were entering a place where ghosts lived. Inside, we went room by room, picking up blankets, straightening items that had been left in the rush of the morning. It was strange how a house could look the same and feel so different, like someone had rearranged the air molecules. I walked into the kitchen and saw the mug my dad had used during breakfast then, day of the arrest. It sat near the sink, still bearing the faint ring from his coffee. I picked it up. My hand shook. Lily came to stand beside me and wrapped her arms around herself. She asked me quietly what would happen next. I told her the prosecution would prepare for trial, that there would be more interviews and hearings, and that the truth would continue to unravel. I said we would not be alone in any of it. We had Sarah. We had Thomas. We had Ethan. And we had each other. There was a softness in her eyes when she looked at me that made me feel like maybe I had protected her in all the ways I wished someone had protected me. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings with attorneys, calls with investigators, and long nights when I would wake up at 3 a.m. from dreams of Mom calling my name. Sometimes Lily would wander into my room in those hours and lie beside me, her breathing steadying mine. We learned more than we wanted to. The financial trail ran deeper than anyone suspected. The payments had started before the accident and continued for months after. The emails between my dad and Marilyn became harder to explain away. The investigator found irregularities in the will's witness signatures. Even Caleb uncovered a discrepancy in my mom's life insurance claim that matched the timeline of those mysterious payments. Every new piece made my chest ache, but each one also made me stand straighter. Each truth was a piece of armor. Then, one morning in early spring, months after the hearing, Sarah called with a voice so calm that I knew something significant had happened before she even said the words. There would be no trial. My dad had agreed to a plea deal. He admitted to obstruction, to tampering with evidence, to paying off the detective. He did not confess to intentionally causing the accident, but the legal language around the plea left enough ambiguity that I knew he was protecting himself as much as he could. Marilyn would face her own set of charges as a co-conspirator. The detective would serve time too. My hand gripped the edge of the kitchen counter as I listened. Lily sat across from me, holding her mug of tea, fingers tight around the ceramic as she watched my face. When I hung up, she asked me what it meant. It meant we would not sit in a courtroom again, listening to lawyers reframe our lives. It meant the truth had been acknowledged in a way the law could sign its name. 2. It meant the storm had moved through, leaving wreckage but also clearing the air. We stepped outside that afternoon. The air was cool and crisp, the kind that makes you believe you might breathe differently if you just let yourself. We walked to the lake, where the water stretched out under the pale sky. I had not been there since before Mom died. The wind whipped strands of hair across my face, and I let it. Lily stood beside me and slipped her hand into mine. She said she felt sad for the dad she thought she had, not the one who existed. I said I felt the same. Grief came in layers, and some layers only revealed themselves once the truth surfaced. Later, back at the house, we boxed up Marilyn's clothes and left them by the door for her attorney to collect. That night, the house felt quiet in a way that finally made sense. Not oppressive, not heavy, just quiet. A week later, Ethan came by to help us move some of my dad's files to storage for the attorneys. He stood in the dining room doorway looking at the table where everything had started. I saw something soft pass across his face. He said he was proud of me. I told him I did not feel brave. He said bravery was not a feeling. It was the choice to keep going. After he left, I sat in my mom's old chair by the window. The late afternoon light washed the room in gold, touching the pictures on the mantel, the worn edges of the books she loved, the spot on the wall where she once hung a painting she never finished. For the first time, I let myself cry without fighting it. Not because of the pain, but because of everything it had taken for the truth to reach the surface. As the sun began to set, I whispered to her that I hoped she could rest now, that her story had been heard, that her daughters were standing, that we were not lost. And then I whispered something for myself, that I was done living in shadows. When evening fell, Lily and I made dinner together. Something simple, something warm. She put on the playlist Mom used to cook to. We stood there, stirring sauce and chopping vegetables, not pretending everything was perfect, but acknowledging that we were rebuilding something honest. Later, as I sat in the quiet of my room, I thought about how many women had carried secrets like mine, how many had been told they were too dramatic, or too emotional, or too much, when their instincts warned them of danger, how many had been silenced by family loyalty, or fear of being alone. And I realized I was not alone at all. Not anymore. So if you are listening to this and you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.